Hi, Rich. Phone call. Perfect timing. Is that you? Is that for you?
No, I don't think so.
It's not for me.
Who's calling? No one's calling me.
No one's calling me. Who's here?
Welcome.
Welcome. Um, so this is Richard Watkins,
Mm,
and we have known each other for a really long time, over 20 years. I think
mm.
we joined What If on the same day in 2006.
June 2006.
Yep. Okay.
Let's say June
So
the 28th, just because
le-
that's today.
okay, June the
Let's
28th.
say
So
it's our anniversary.
20 years ago today, we started
Exactly.
at
Could
the
have been.
same company. It could have easily been. And we spent a lot of time together. We traveled a
Mm,
lot together. Can you believe that was
mm,
our job? Someone sent us to Rio to look in people's fridges.
mm,
Okay, so you know that I have been trying to sort of explore this world of being a human at work and people
mm,
intelligence. And I have a theory that the more human you are and the more you can flex your
mm,
human intelligence, the higher performing a team can be, etc.
mm,
But I'm really interested in the whole world of people and work and how that blends. And we have done loads of work together. So you've actually come and worked with my team, which is amazing. And I think there's really interesting stuff that you've done on the work side, but I also think you're a really interesting person on the life side.
Yeah. And maybe it's interesting because we were really close and spent loads of time to each other and then didn't see each other for like that 20 years isn't like constantly
No.
seeing each other. It's like, and you going through huge stuff that I saw very much at a distance
Yeah.
and life changing lots for both of us with kids and life and all of that. And then kind of reconnecting again more recently.
Yeah, which was really fun. And I think, just so
Mm,
you know, you have had a massive impact on my team, and we'll get into it later. But everyone calls themselves out on their defensiveness all the time. So just so
mm,
you know, even though we did it a little while ago, it is still there and
yeah.
happening. So, do you want to explain a little bit about your journey and kind of obviously from when we worked together to where you are now? Because that's kind of fascinating in itself.
I was started my career as a scientist.
Really young,
Yeah, a
at like
16-year-old
16. Yeah.
lab assistant for BP, the oil company. And then about 8 years into that, I flipped and became an innovation consultant and started on the same day as you.
Yeah.
And then really had no idea what I was doing for like 2 years. Then I lived in Shanghai and then I lived in South Korea for a little bit and all with that what job. And then in 2013, I left and then I was kind of just drifting around for a bit. And then in 2016, I kind of found a way of thinking about collaboration and basically pivoted from like helping people think about strategy and organizational change and all that and started helping people think about how to work well together. And now this is the 10th year of me doing that. And what's funny about that, of course, is the first few things I did were not very helpful at all. It was just me with a theory, just
But
another white guy with
I
a theory,
actually,
welding it like around like this.
well,
And
but
then,
one thing I remember one
yeah.
of your first videos, and it was on YouTube, and it was about leadership, but as a state of mind. I don't
Mm,
remember it really clearly, and you were saying it's not status, it's not
mm.
something. But how did you get to that? So what made you go, something isn't right, or I need to have a different opinion on leadership and people at work?
I'm not saying this for you, Katie, because you know this, but I'm quite intense. And I think
Yeah.
I've always been very interested in thinking intensely about me, about my place in the world, about how other people are, about how they work, I've put a lot of hours into sort of just wondering about people. I write poetry and have written poetry for a very long time. I've been involved in like lots of personal development kind of work, really from as young as I can remember, been sort of in and out of various religious movements. I'm just quite intense.
Yeah,
And
but
I
and
think,
where do you think that comes from? As in like the inner, it's like your brain is always thinking about deep things. Like that's kind of
yeah,
my observation of you, is that you are a constant deep thinker.
it's a really nice strategy for avoiding living life
Okay.
or certainly it has been in the past. I don't know, Katie. I think there's all sorts of stories that we could tell. And one story is we could say, I don't know, and like there were some things about growing up for me that were particularly difficult. And then that had me think about all these things. And it was sort of the best I could do was to think a lot about how things work and how people work. That's like one story. I think there's another story, which is just like this is the kind of little weird soul that I am. And I'm like a gift to the world in a very peculiar way.
Yeah.
And I'm very not great at lots of things. And there's some things I'm quite good at. And so almost like separate from any story about what caused it, it's just like, this is what I'm like. This is the
Yeah.
kind of animal that I was born to be in the world. And I think, and then probably the biggest part, and maybe a third story, and I think maybe the truest, I don't know. The third story would just be like, I've just been really interested in this. And
Yeah.
what I have always done, and again, there's a kind of privilege to this, but also just it's just how I'm wired. I've always followed stuff I'm interested in, and if I'm not
Yeah.
interested, I don't really do it. And if I am interested, I do it a lot. And I've just got the kind of character that just follows stuff that I'm interested in, and the particular things I'm interested in are like people, human dynamics, how people work, why people do things. Like I'm just interested. And so that's taken me to read a lot and to play a lot, but also just to go on loads of loads and loads and loads of hours of like, like I'm just going to go for a week and do this course, or I'm going to go and do another course in another week. And then I'm going to change and do something completely different.
But it's all added up to something. And I mean,
Yeah.
I completely, I feel exactly the same, but I think it's
Mm,
slightly different. I think I have always felt on the outside of life and always felt like
mm,
I didn't fit in. And so whether anyone else would have ever felt that, I have no idea,
mm.
but in my head, but I think I have just observed people like my entire life and been fascinated by like people and what they do and why they do it. And, I think I'm potentially less intense than you, but still have a lot of quirks. But I think that the curiosity is, I mean, maybe you disagree. Maybe I am as intense as you.
I don't know. I don't even know what that means, Katie. When
Me
people ask
neither.
me how
Actually,
I've
me
just
neither.
people saying basically sometimes someone will be like, oh, I'll be like, oh, I really like this person, and then someone will be like, they're quite intense though, and I'll be like,
Yeah,
I
yeah.
don't know,
Yeah.
because I don't
But yeah,
really. That's not really how I judge things, and so
right. It's your intense barometer is kind of
I don't
off
have a
because
very good
no,
radar for intense, so I can't tell you.
I'm wondering if I do. I'll have a think about that. But I totally agree with you. I think people are fascinating and
Yeah,
how people behave. And then I think that is a very human curiosity. But what you've done an amazing job of is taking that to help others at work, which is really
yeah,
kind of specific. And that's amazing. It's like all of your ponderings from your life have kind of come together really nicely. And it's like, this is not small fry. Like you are
mm,
training hundreds and hundreds of
yeah,
people in your methodology in day-to-day business. Like that
yeah.
is fascinating. Like how many people have you kind of taught your
Don't know. Like it's difficult to really quantify.
like
Though it'd be probably
30,000, fifty
yeah, something like
thousand?
that.
Yeah. Uh,
Yeah, something like that. But some of that's through other people training other people. So there's like trainers who then train people, and then that's
but
why it gets.
but that doesn't matter. I mean, I guess I'm trying to like
Yeah, like
say the
but yeah, a
overall
decent amount.
impact.
Like a lot of people have,
Yeah.
but a lot of people, yeah, a lot of people, and a lot of people at quite high levels as well, like
Yeah.
through different
Agreed.
organizations.
And so why, I mean, let's start with the basics. Why do you believe that collaboration is so important? I mean, it sounds obvious, but I think a lot of
Yeah.
people don't think about this.
I think we're like, is basically the thing humans do. Like the only thing we do is work well together, really. At the time of humans, we were the ones who got together. And then we realized that you don't have to be as strong, you don't have to be as clever, you don't have to be as powerful if you can coordinate really well. And so I think humans just are good at getting stuff done together. And I think sometimes we're not great at knowing, not great at paying attention to the process that is. Like we're good at paying attention to things we're trying to do, but not the process of how we're trying to do things. And so really that's the thing that I'm interested in is like, but how do we do it?
Well, I mean, I think maybe we could start with what happens when you don't, because I think people
Mhm.
see that all day, every day.
Yeah.
And, obviously there's a lot going on in the world right now, which is a kind of classic product of people not collaborating or
Yeah.
doing things together. And I think in day-to-day work, it isn't everywhere all the time. I think you do have to work really hard at bringing groups and dynamics together
Yeah.
to get everybody to work well together because everyone is so different. There are so many variables. So imagine you all work in the same company, right? So in
Yeah.
theory, your goals should be common or the same because you have
Yeah.
all selected that, I
Yeah.
would like to work here. I would like to be part of this team and I would like to contribute to the common goal, right? But then human nature and kind of human behaviors show up every day for a million different reasons that are very individual to that person, that time, that
Yeah.
moment, that context that impacts how they behave or how they collaborate. And it takes a lot of right circumstances and a lot of the right behaviors to get a group. I think basically what I'm saying is it's really not easy. And I think
Yeah.
anyone would assume you're on the same team, you have the same goals, and you're working on the same project, that you should be able to all just get on with it. But it's really not that
Yeah.
simple,
No,
right?
it's
And
not
it's
like that.
like, right. So what are kind of some of the human behaviors that show up every day that can get in the way of
Yeah.
collaboration or doing a good job together?
So I basically want to make a distinction between two kinds of ways collaboration cannot work.
Okay.
One kind of way is that actually the thing we're doing isn't like we're not aligned and we really want different things and we're pulling in the actual work. We we can't make the work for us.
Well, I
Like
think that but I think in order to get to that, you have to admit that the work doesn't work, which I don't think a
yeah.
lot of people do. So,
So yeah, so I think there's like one thing which is the work doesn't work.
okay.
And then I actually think, ironically, you can have a really grown up collaborative conversation about saying, oh, wow, we're maybe not such a good match. Let's move a different way. Right. But you can stay in a kind of good relationship, even though the work doesn't work. And
But
there's
people
another
don't
kind of,
talk about the work doesn't work. They just
no,
pretend.
yeah, sometimes. And there's
Mm,
certainly a lot. Right. So
right.
you've got the work not working, but then you've got this other thing where, and this is what we've sort of spoken about a little bit before, but it is kind of almost like the behaviors aren't right, where we're not behaving well together. And that's where the best way that there's lots of different ways you can think about that.
Mhm.
But the best way that I've found is rooted in Virginia Satir, who's I was going to say the mother of family therapy, but she's more like the queen of family therapy because
Okay.
she kind of created this whole approach that was very different from any psychotherapeutic approaches when she kind of created it, which was all about family systems rather than individuals. So not psychoanalyzing individuals, but really looking at systems and how people work well together.
So it is taking something that is about families and how families kind
Yeah,
of work together into the business world.
yeah, exactly.
I think that's really interesting in
So
itself.
I was on a course about Virginia Satir because she's brilliant. And then I was like, this is really relevant to work. And she basically said, she talked about, and I kind of taken what she talks about and I talk about it slightly differently. She talked about communication stress styles. So how do we communicate when we're stressed?
Mhm.
But she also talked about defensiveness and that them as defensiveness. So I talk about defensive stances, like 5 defensive stances that people take. And I think they all cause damage and they cause damage in different ways.
Mhm. So
And
when can I just
yeah,
make sure that I understood that? So when okay, so defensiveness is
mm,
a barrier to collaboration, or in the Virginia Satir scenario, it's kind of like family kind of harmony or family
yeah,
structures, right?
or
And
family
then
collaboration, we could say.
family
Like
collaboration,
a
right? So
family
then
working.
and so
Yeah,
if you take that correlation into business, it is that defensiveness is a human behavior that is a blockage or a barrier to collaboration. And we all need
yeah,
collaboration to be successful because we're all people in businesses, in teams doing things together. Is that the kind of like basic foundation?
yeah. And we could go further and say defensiveness is a barrier to relationships.
Right.
It's a barrier
Agree.
to
Agree.
trust. It's a
Okay.
barrier to everything. It's a barrier to anything where we're working with anyone. So defensiveness as a issue, in a way, it's not just coded to collaboration,
Right.
although whatever we mean
Gets
by
in the
that,
way of a
coded
lot
to
of
kind of
things.
anything.
Right. And just again, covering the basics, we as humans all have elements of defensiveness.
Yeah, we all get defensive.
I would bet that there are multiple scenarios within an hour that could trigger elements of defensiveness in the day to day work of a business or a team.
Yeah.
Okay. So if defensiveness is the kind of barrier to relationships, to trust, to collaboration, all of those
Mm.
things, how have you kind of broken that down to help people understand it? Because I guess you
Yeah.
need
And
to
it might,
understand it. Sorry, go on.
no, yeah. And it might be worth just saying, because I'm sort of, we talk about defensiveness. People use that word to mean loads of things. I use it to mean 5 things, like 5
Mm,
types of defense. that might be worth just saying
Yes.
so people can kind of get a grasp for it. So basically, defensiveness can be blaming. So that's orientating around whose fault is this?
Mm-hmm.
It can be placating, which is where you're defending yourself. Like, let's say I'm with you and I'm placating. I'm defending myself by saying what I think you want to hear,
Mm-hmm.
right? So I'm like, sometimes people call it people pleasing. I don't like
Mm-hmm.
that because I think it doesn't please anyone.
Right.
But it, so you've got blaming, placating, being dogmatic, saying there's only one way things are and it's like this. It's another way of defending ourselves, because if I'm dogmatic and if I'm right, then I don't have to engage with other people's opinions because I'm right. And
Mm-hmm.
that's a nice way of defending myself. Avoiding, that is just like sliding away from the issue, like brushing things under the carpet, pushing things on, and posturing. And posturing is almost like where my main emphasis is like, oh, how do I look in this situation? So, I mean, we could even look and go, often something like social media is lots of posturing. It's
Yeah.
lots of people wanting to look good,
Yeah.
not wanting to have the honest conversation about what is real, what is alive in the moment, what's really going on. And at work, there's lots of posturing because, you know, people are preoccupied with their own. I mean, I hate stuff like personal brand. I hate that as a concept, even though I kind of get what's underneath it,
Yeah.
because I think it incentivizes people to just basically posture and just say, oh, I'm so good and I'm so great. And I think it gets in the way of good relationships. So we've got blaming, placating, dogmatic, avoiding, and posturing. And that
So,
is what I call defensiveness.
okay. So, question. Do you think each individual can play in multiple areas of those five at different times? Or like, do you
Yeah.
tend to lean towards one? Like, what's the most, yeah, how does that work within an individual?
Yeah, I think different situations. So I think humans
Mm,
are
really fucking
basically
complicated.
contextual animals. Like, we exist differently in different contexts.
Mm-hmm.
So in a home life, we might show up a certain way. In a work life, we'll show up in lots of different ways, depending on, you know, like sometimes I'm talking to leaders who are part of a team, have a team, and have peers. And all those three directions, they might show up with different kinds of defensiveness.
Yeah.
Some people really placate their teams and they want to say the nice things their teams want to hear. And they kind of think that they're protecting them, but they're just
Mm-hmm.
saying nice things that they want to hear rather than telling them how it is. But some people do that the other way. They placate their boss and they might be dogmatic with their teams. So
Mm-hmm.
it, I think we
People
all
move
have the
between all of
right.
them basically at all
Yeah,
times. And it is so before we get into anything about like what you can do with that, because I think that's a
yeah,
separate thing. It's almost the awareness of
yeah.
your inner dialogue on what's happening to you. And I don't know if you would agree with this, but I was thinking about those five because obviously we have done this work within my team and it's kind of like a common
Yeah.
language. But I kind of had a thought that what are you typing?
I'm figuring out because I want to say something that someone said, and I'm checking who it was who
Okay.
said it.
Okay.
Go on.
So I have a theory that two of those are more dangerous than the other three.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So I think some are obvious and some are not. And actually it's the
Yeah.
silent ones that are potentially more dangerous. So if you think about dogmatism, posturing,
Mm.
and oh my God, what's the third one? Anyway, but
Blaming.
blaming, they're all kind of obvious, right? As in like
Yeah.
they can be experienced or seen or felt by a person,
Mm.
right? So when someone is any of those three things, you feel it or you hear it or both, right? I
Mm.
think the most interesting is placating and avoidance because they're hidden. And that means that they don't show up or you don't necessarily know what's going on. Anyway,
Mm.
I have been thinking about that because the things that are not said and the things that are totally avoided or you are led to believe that they
Mm.
are something other than they are actually are the deeper ones that are more concerning because they don't show themselves or it takes time for them to show themselves.
That might be though, because you're a person of, and I say this honestly, that you're a person of great courage. Like, you are someone who can step into difficult situations with courage, and you always have done. You've always been brave. And I think if you have that, then something like blaming or posturing or even dogmatic, you're like, well, at least I can step into it,
Right.
right? But for some people, actually
Mm-hmm.
stepping into those kinds of situations feels much harder, and like blaming has a bigger impact. And And something like avoiding, they might be able to sense it more. Like they might be more on the side of like really being able to sense that and being able to work with it. That I think that some of them will be more dangerous to us or more difficult for us, but the spread across the five will be depend on what.
I tell you why. So obviously I run a business, right? And I am thinking
Mm,
from a business perspective. If you have goals and things to achieve, but things are placated or avoided, right? That
yeah.
really sends you off on different paths, or
Yeah.
it completely stops your progress.
Yeah.
Whereas I do think that those three that are kind of active, at least they drive an action, right? Which means that
Yeah.
there is often a consequence or a next step. And I listened to something the other day, which I thought was really interesting, and I was going to ask you what you thought about it. But there is also, conflict is good, and the good collaboration kind of
Yeah.
leads to that. And the difference between resolving conflict 99% and 101% is
Mm,
everything. And maybe we could part that and come back to it. But at least I think some of the three defensive, I mean, look, they're
yeah.
all important and you should explore them all. However, I think three lead to some kind of action or conflict resolution or discussion or debate because you can see them or you can feel them. So if we have these five,
I like to think of blaming as a stance we sometimes choose to take.
okay.
And therefore, rather than thinking of them as like inner qualities, because the trouble is then they're quite hard to get rid of because they're in us. I think of them as like, I'm tempted to take a stance that is avoiding, or I'm
Well,
tempted to take a stance that is posturing. And I
but,
think
but
then, yeah,
But okay, so I know that obviously you've studied this and you have a very intellectual approach to it, but you make it sound like a choice. So when you
yeah,
say stance, you're making it sound like a choice. I would
yeah,
say
I'm
that
deliberately making it sound like a
right,
choice.
right, okay, because it has to be a
If
choice to
it's,
feel like it's changeable. Right, and which I totally agree with. But I think that if
yeah,
you go back to this is a new theory and someone is kind of listening to this and they haven't ever thought
yeah,
about their defensiveness,
yeah,
I would say that the basics start with even acknowledging those feelings when they come up. And I think in
yeah,
that scenario, it isn't a choice because you are feeling
yeah,
something that happens to you. And
yeah,
it is a journey. And I would say that you have gone a long way because you spend all day talking about this and kind of living it. Is that you jumped quite far to it is a choice, therefore you can change it. But I think that the very basic fundamentals are that people need to almost flex it and
mm,
understand I am being or feeling defensive
yeah,
in any of these ways and kind of acknowledging that within themselves, probably quietly and mentally. Because I think going back to the courage thing, right? I mean, I guess it also, I am direct and I do say things out loud and, but I think that comes from years of doing this sort of stuff and really
100%.
giving a shit about it and believing that it has an impact and makes a difference. But if you have never really thought about that before, the first thing
Mm.
to do is almost listen to yourself.
Yeah,
Something
yeah, fine.
happens where you have a feeling and you're like, it is an emotion when you're
Yeah.
kind of like, I feel defensive and it can show up in any of those ways. Like, how do you help people even get in tune with the fact that they're having these emotions?
Yeah, I de-escalate how bad it is to have them. I basically say defensiveness is normal.
Right.
Like you've kind of said some of this already. Defensive is normal. We all get defensive. Whenever there's pressure, there's defensiveness. Defensiveness is it's normal to take a
Yeah.
defensive stance. So,
Yes.
and also I'm never telling people stop being defensive because it's
Right.
just what an insane thing to say to people. Like no one
Mm-hmm.
can stop being defensive. So, but then actually there's a kind of gentle, and then I also say, don't blame yourself for blaming,
Right.
right? Because you can take a defensive stance to yourself, like, and you can avoid the whole thing, go, oh, I don't want to think about any of
Yeah.
that. Or you can be really dogmatic and say, this is my model and it's the only model and so you can also take a defensive stance even to yourself.
Yeah.
And I'm sort of saying, we got to take a sort of gentle, accommodating stance that just says, let's be curious. So
Right.
the thing I was typing, I was looking up. So Carl Rogers, who's a Gestalt therapist or one of the original, he says awareness is curative. Like awareness cures things.
Okay.
Even just being aware of stuff is the cure sometimes,
Right.
rather than like, oh, when you're aware, you can fix things. It's like, no, the awareness is the thing that kind of
Right.
cures things or heals things. And I think often therapy is that. It's, whichever modality you use, you're talking about stuff and then, oh, I can see that there's some patterns that are repeating. I can see it. And seeing it is the thing. Definitely to defensiveness.
I totally agree, and I think even the you spot it and you say it. So if you were live in a collaboration or a conversation and you feel yourself getting defensive, but sorry, I was just getting defensive there. It takes this kind of like
Mm.
heat out of everything and kind of level sets the room instantly. And it's really powerful, but I think it is the confidence and the acceptance of, yeah, I was sorry, I'm getting defensive about something, and calling it is a game changer in itself. But the awareness, okay, so the awareness is the cure. So how
Mm.
do people become aware? It's kind of it's looking at those 5 things and going, where does that show up for me?
And a bit bringing it into social conversation. So, like, we worked with your team, and you then raise it as a conversation topic. And once it's a conversation topic, it's no longer a taboo. It's
Right.
also something we have a shared language for. We can talk about it. And then it's easier to say, I think I got defensive there.
Mm.
Otherwise, people might think, well, what do you mean by that? Well, we know what we mean by that. I mean, and you could even name it like, I'm sorry, I was a bit blaming with you yesterday, or like, oh, was I being a bit posturing? I didn't mean to be. Like, even that, then there's a sort of way then of it. So humans, again, like, we exist in contexts. So I think most of what a human is contextual.
Mhm.
Like, and then we're also relational. We exist with people. And so if we want to get more aware of anything, then it will always be in particular contexts. So that's when we can start noticing things. And it will always be in relationships. And so therefore finding the right language for stuff that allows us to have honest, grounded conversations that don't get us too tangled up
Mhm.
is, I think, is the heart of what I think is important
Yeah.
in a
Well,
lot of this stuff. But also I'll say it's not the only thing that's important. And you can,
no.
it is also a lot. Yeah, but that's that. So
But
that's
it's a
why I think,
massive there's so much, and this is it, is that every human is different in every context, in every single scenario, right? So
mm,
then the variables are huge, and then the things that can change that, and like you said, that there are a lot of things that you can do to kind of, and I think that the work you do is much broader than just defensiveness. And obviously the last thing I want is for
yeah,
everyone to think that you're like a defensiveness
the
expert, but
defensiveness guy. I don't
right,
mind.
the
I mean, that would
defensive
be great.
but what I think is fascinating is that you getting in tune with
Mm.
your feelings and how they show up and in what context and where and what they're not serving you. So how do you use the vulnerability of that
Yeah,
as a strength? And how do you throw that out there as actually let me remove myself. It doesn't matter like how I feel. What are we trying to do or what are we
yeah,
trying to achieve? Or how can we be open to other things that your mind would instantly kind of be closed off to? I think it's really interesting, and it is that unless you can get over that hurdle, the rest of the conversation is kind of pointless
mhm,
because your mind is not in the right frame to hear anything or to listen to
yeah,
anybody else.
yeah, 100%.
If we're saying defensiveness is kind of a barrier to collaboration, trust, relationships, and
Yeah,
kind of getting to goals, and then the next step is being aware of what your kind of
yeah,
defensiveness is in that moment.
yeah,
How how can you quickly kind of stop yourself or kind of interrupt it or redirect it
yeah.
within the moment? And I'm sure the answer is complicated because there's so many different scenarios, but
No, no,
it
there's an
okay,
answer. The
okay.
answer is you can't quickly. So the answer is you can't quickly.
Oh,
You can slowly. So what you can is by noticing, you can slowly soften your defensiveness, and you can slowly, and so what that means is when you work, if you start thinking about this and you want to take it seriously, you can just start noticing. And but the biggest thing is not to try and do it too quickly. So I would always take people through a process to do it slowly, because basically anything good that happens has to happen slowly, especially if we're looking at something so fundamental. Always start with yourself. Always start with, where's my defensiveness? And then again, once you can get a grip on your own defensiveness, then there's sort of 3 things you can do. The hardest one is to deal with it in the moment. The easiest one is to figure out how you're going to be defensive in a particular context before you're in it. So I'm really going to be really tempted to avoid this difficult topic, and then to plan to not,
yeah.
right? Right. My temptation is to avoid it, or my temptation is to blame or point fingers, like let's say you're going into a retrospective to make it very corporate, like you're going to look back at something that hasn't really worked, to know that your temptation under that pressure is going to be to point a finger to see who's to blame. If you can then go into that conversation and basically say, commit to not doing that, and that will be better. So that's the easiest.
Yep.
The second easiest is to have gone in and have told everyone it was their fault, but then afterwards say sorry and say, to basically notice it afterwards. So you can notice it before, you can notice it afterwards. And then the hardest is to notice it's happening right there, right then. Something's coming up and you're being defensive. And so, but the good news one, you can always do the repair it afterwards one. And you can then realize that it's important and make better plans to avoid
In
it.
the future. So it's kind of it's cumulative, because if you can pull all of those three things over time and get good at it, then you're
Yeah.
going to get the practice in. What do you think saying sorry, particularly at work? It's quite powerful in a way, don't you think?
Maybe saying sorry is one type of a bigger category of thing called repair. Repair is fundamental to relationships. Every culture does repair. Also think apology is a really strong, powerful thing because it really does something good to relationships. If you say to someone, like, you know what, I was under so much pressure and I don't know if I treated you very well at that time.
It's like, what's your intention? But I think that is the difference between fixing something 99% and 101%. Because the interesting thing is, out of all of these things you talk about, like, defensiveness or repair, so many if in one working day, you could interact with 50, 70 different
Yeah.
people. And as a human, you're not going to get every single one perfect or right. There's bumps along the
And
way.
power plays a role here because relationships at work don't tend to be symmetrical.
Mm-hmm.
That, like if you're the leader, as you are in your context, like some of the stuff that you do will have a heavier impact than if you were like the intern, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like it matters differently, and that's a difficult thing to hold. But also, it's not, you can't fully then say, oh, let's remove power from the equation. Like it just is there, and power's really hard to contend with, and also there'll be other situations where you're, for different reasons, client relationships or whatever, where the power's differently balanced and you're not in the position of, and therefore it will work really differently. Partly
No.
that's because I don't get everything right, Katie. Like I teach this stuff, but I get defensive. I was
Because you
really,
are messing up all day, every day with the best intentions. And I think it is the awareness and the repair and all of these
yeah,
other things that go with it that make all the difference, because you won't be able to adapt yourself that you're absolutely perfect, because you can't control what environment you're in, what the circumstance is, what mood you're in,
100%.
all at the same time, to be like everything's going to be perfect. So within that, you accept that it's going to be bumpy, and then you kind of embrace the human side of it, which is like, sorry, was I defensive there? I didn't mean
Yeah.
or it is the awareness and the repair, which actually is really interesting, and that will stay with me. But it's helping people get on the same level playing field with awareness and repair, because I
And
think that is where some people are great at it and love it and are curious, and some people are not into this stuff at all, but they still have
yeah,
positions of power and kind of
yeah,
big roles and responsibilities. And so it's like, this is kind of why I want to do this podcast, because I think it is a conversation that is optional at work, and it
mm,
shouldn't be, because in the
yeah,
end, if you don't have that, you are getting in the way of success. And some people, a deep, honest conversation would be their absolute idea of hell,
yeah,
and it's potentially, never going to happen. And I guess I could say I disagree with that, because it gets in the way
yeah.
of progress and people and things. However, we're not in control of other people's behaviors, and it starts with you, and you can only start with kind of
Yeah.
understanding and working on yourself, which again I
And
think is the fascinating part.
can I say something about
Yeah.
this? Because this is sort of at the heart of why I think being undefensive is better. So sometimes, there's different labels for what not. Like, let's just say what not: blaming, not being dogmatic, not avoiding, not placating, and not posturing. If you don't do those things, you're undefensive. And that's,
Okay.
most of us, most of the time, can be like that. And it's great. And that's why we like humans. But being that is often called vulnerable. People say, oh, that's
Mm,
vulnerable.
mm,
You're being vulnerable.
yeah.
I actually don't like that. I don't like
Oh,
that label. And the reason I don't like that label is
mhm.
because I actually think it's the most powerful position
Right,
to
but I
be
agree. I
on guard.
totally but I love vulnerability because I think it's powerful. So
It's
so
really powerful. And so I think sometimes when people think I'm expected to be vulnerable, they basically a lot of people have who's use the word vulnerable.
I think what you're saying is you don't like the rep that the word vulnerability has.
Yeah.
And okay, which I agree. It's that if everyone thinks that vulnerability is a weakness, but actually it should be seen as your greatest power. And if we could all flex our own vulnerability and get out of our kind of own
Yeah.
way, things would be a lot easier.
And and
However,
and and on
and
vulnerability, I think that when we say to people, especially people who are quite scared of being weak, we say to them, "Hey, you should be more vulnerable." We're doing them a disservice because what we actually mean is
you should, you
there's
should
more
be
power for
braver.
you if you can find the courage to actually take
Yeah,
down this meaningless armor that just gets you in trouble time and time
yeah,
again.
yeah.
There's more to you than this. You're bigger than this. You're more than this. And actually that might be a more useful way of
Yeah,
enticing people into vulnerability.
agree. Agree. We need to rebrand vulnerability. I love it. Okay. What would you call it if you could? Courage. Comfortable is one way to think about it. It's that you're kind of
Yeah.
you have comfort in yourself and any outcome. And it's when you show up to something wedded to an outcome before you've even had the discussion, or when you show up to something determined to, like, be who it's all the outcomes are decided before anything even starts. Like that is kind of game over. Like, why are you even showing
I
up?
really like
But
that.
everyone does it.
Yeah. I really like comfortable. I think comfortable is a really nice way of saying, hey, wouldn't it be great if you're more comfortable and comfortable
Yeah.
in pressure, comfortable in, there can be pressure, there can be change, there can be ambiguity, and you need to be a bit more comfortable. And
Mm,
actually, there is a way to be a bit more comfortable, and it's to take some of all that work you're doing to keep yourself protected. If
mm,
you could find a way to slowly, in a way that feels okay to you, slowly, again, not quickly, not how do we quickly do it, but how do we slowly become less defensive,
mm,
and then you'll be more comfortable
mm.
and you'll be more at home and you'll be more grounded and you'll be more powerful and loads of things will be possible for you. You'll be
Right.
more mature.
Yeah. Because I mean, I think comfort, it kind of expresses that you have no sort of personal gain. It is just that you are kind of like balanced and ready for whatever comes
Yeah.
your way, and you will adapt. Because the other thing that what everything you said made me think of is obviously the world is changing really, really fast, and
Mm,
AI, all the things. And it is kind of impossible to predict
mm,
like we used to. So we used to be in a world where you could be like, well, let's look at last year's plan and see
mm,
what we're going to do this year and we'll adapt it. You
yeah.
can't do that anymore. It doesn't exist. It's literally like, what is the context today in this hour? What
Mm,
how are you showing up comfortably or openly to deal with
mm,
that? Because you can't plan it anymore.
mm,
And I really do think that come to resolution much quicker. That isn't like, great, and we'll go away and come back again next week and
mm,
see where we are with the plan. We're not in that space anymore. So I'm kind of really excited by the fact that people really need to do some work on themselves and
mm,
kind of go deep to be fit for 2027 ready. Is like,
mm.
forget your financial plan. Like, what emotional kind of depth work are you doing on yourself so that you can handle whatever comes? Because you can't plan for it, so you may as well. I just said you can't plan for it, but what I mean is the planning for it, the work that needs to be done is on yourself.
Yeah. And I think certainly, yeah, I really, I really hear all that. And I think that's, yeah, I don't know. I mean, I get worried about the future as well. So I think all of these things are proper things to contend with. I was wondering whether you sort of, when we talked before, you'd sort of said to not just be limited to a work kind of perspective. And what popped
Mm,
into my head as one of the things you were talking to is 22, 23 years ago, I had a really bad snowboarding accident and I almost died. And I wondered just in that moment as you were talking, I was like, actually being able to look into the abyss
hmm
is one of the great skills right now. And some of us have been blessed with an abyss that we've had to look into.
Yep.
And I was wondering whether that's like, I was just sort of never thought of it before
Mm.
as something that was, I actually quite not like, but I don't mind, and I've learned this over time, not just in that one moment, but I've definitely learned over time to look more into. the fact that things are difficult, the fact that
Mm.
I don't always show up well, the fact that the world is uncertain, the fact that all of those kind of things. And I think that that is a kind of, again, when you can do that more, there's maybe slightly less terror. And I think
Right.
there is a lot of terror in people who can't even begin to imagine thinking about the worst. Like, hey, you might have half a salary, or you might have, like things might really, really be different for any of us. And can we even imagine it? Can we imagine bad things happening? Because I think if you can't even do that, that's very hard then to go to look into some of the more difficult aspects of our nature.
It's so funny that that's kind of where you went with it, because I think I do mean it as a, like, fair warning to people. However, I am not scared of it. I'm kind of quite
Yeah.
excited about it. And I think that is because you and I have both lived through things that
Mhm.
probably make you think, well, potentially the worst has already happened, or,
Mm,
how bad could it be? I really trust that
mm,
things will work out how they're meant
mm,
to. And all I can do is show up the best I can every day, which is not perfect. Absolutely not.
mm,
And, like, it never will be. But to be aware and to repair,
mm,
new terms. And that's kind of the best you can do. And the rest will take care of itself. And I think that's, I don't know, for me the lesson is try not to over manage, and
mm,
try and just take it as it comes, because you're not in control and you can't predict the future. And actually maybe that's quite exciting instead of
mm,
terrifying. Well, some of the best things come from the toughest stuff, and
mm,
you don't really know that at the time, but in the end it kind of, comes back in a way that you never thought was helpful. But the reality is you can worry about the future, but what are you doing today to get ready for that? And there isn't really that much you can do other than make sure that how you are and how you show up is the best it can be for yourself and for others. And, like, that sounds really deep and simple, but it's like it actually, when you get, well, I find when I get overwhelmed with all of those other thoughts,
yeah.
it's like, what are you going to do today that could be helpful? And it is just about yourself. And
Yeah.
I heard someone say, your habits today predict your future, but
Mm,
people don't really kind of make the connection to that. And the whatever you're spending the majority of your time on today will be
mm,
your future. So what does that look like? And obviously it's different for everyone, but I found that really helpful in how do you start to shift your thinking to what is helpful or productive or positive, and what can you do today that might make your future better. I feel like we just touched on the fact that you had a really bad accident, nearly died, and then sort of moved on.
I
Do you
mean,
wanna just
but
do you
you know
wanna
what,
just go
Katie?
back to that?
That's fine. I mean, yeah, I had a bad snowboarding accident. Yeah, but the funny thing for me though, again, this is a weird thing. I forget that that's a really intense thing for people to hear, and that some people on listening would go like, "Oh wow, that's." But of course, I've lived with it for 23 years, and so I'm doing an executive education program, like a executive readiness. Like, how do you move from a senior leader to an executive leader, like a CXO program with a dear friend of mine, a dear colleague of mine, and we're running that program over next year, I think. But like, there's a whole bunch of stuff like that that I love to do to take people on the journey and to kind of really contend with how do we collaborate well, how do we lead well, um, and all of that. Um, yeah, and that's the kind of work that I feel pretty lucky that being obsessed with how people work for 20,
Yeah.
30 years.
One last question. So what has really shaped your life and made you who you are, but is not on your LinkedIn?
It's a nice, easy one to end, isn't it?
Well, you could throw that, you had a snowboarding accident and nearly died in there. That's probably not
Yeah,
on your
that's one.
LinkedIn.
That's one.
Yeah.
I think it could either be, I mean, it will be one of my creative practice,
Yeah.
poetry, which is, I've been writing poetry for a long time. My spiritual practices, which have been very varied, and then just different kind of, yeah, personal development kind of practices, like weird retreats that I've been on. Again, I had
Yeah.
this realization in my late 20s that I wasn't actually trying to fix myself, which is sort of what I thought I was doing. I just was having a lot of fun on these kind of like weird, intense retreats. So I've done a lot of like, different kind of personal development type work.
But they've all built you to they've all of this has shaped you to
Yeah,
who you are, and I don't think that you would have built a practice and a methodology so deeply around human
no,
behavior and how people collaborate if you hadn't lived all of those things.
100%.
100%.
100%.
Well, thank you
Yeah.
very much.
Thanks, Katie. Nice
Yeah.
conversation.